The crowd fell silent as Belle Kincaid took her place on the auction block, the tears she refused to shed burning behind her eyes like fire. Denver, Colorado Territory, 1867, a place where fortunes were made and souls were lost among the silver mines and cattle ranches that dotted the expanding western frontier. Belle's threadbare calico dress hung loosely on her thin frame, her honey-colored hair twisted into a simple braid that fell over one shoulder. She was 22, alone, and about to be sold to the highest bidder to settle her late father's gambling debts. "Next up, gentlemen." The auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the dusty town square. "A fine young woman to cook your meals and warm your beds. Bidding starts at $50. Belle stared out at the sea of weather-beaten faces, miners with silver dust still clinging to their beards, ranchers with hands calloused from rope and reins, and saloon owners looking for fresh entertainment. She felt her heart hammering against her ribs, threatening to break through. At the back of the crowd stood Isaac Grant, his tall frame leaning against a hitching post. At 26, he had spent the last 8 years building his ranch from nothing into one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory. His dark hair curled beneath his Stetson, and his eyes, the color of a summer storm, narrowed as he watched the proceedings. $50, came a shout from a portly man who owned the Silver Star Saloon. 60, called another, a rancher with a face like tanned leather. Isaac straightened, his hand instinctively checking the pouch of coins at his belt, every cent he had managed to save over the past months. The money had been earmarked for new breeding stock, the future of his ranch depending on those cattle. But something in the woman's dignified posture, despite her trembling hands, struck a chord deep within him. $100. A miner shouted, his eyes gleaming with something that made Belle's skin crawl. The auctioneer's face lit up. $100, do I hear 120? 150, Isaac called out, his voice steady and clear, heads turned. Everyone knew Isaac Grant, knew he wasn't a man to waste money on frivolities. He had come to town to buy cattle, not a woman. 200, countered the saloon owner, his jowls quivering with determination. Isaac stepped forward, moving through the crowd until he stood at the front. 300, he said, meeting Belle's gaze for the first time. She saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in any man since her father died decency. The bidding continued, escalating rapidly. Isaac matched each bid calmly, though Belle could see the tension in his jaw. $500. The saloon owner shouted, red-faced and sweating. The crowd murmured. That was more than a year's wages for most men. Isaac reached into his pouch, counting the coins with a steady hand. $873, he announced, emptying the pouch onto the auctioneer's table. Every cent I have. The square fell silent. Belle felt her breath catch in her throat. The auctioneer looked at the saloon owner, who hesitated, then shook his head. Sold. To Mr. Grant for $873. Relief washed over Belle, followed immediately by a new fear. What did this stranger want with her? What would become of her now? Isaac approached the block, offering his hand to help her down. Miss, my name is Isaac Grant. I own the Double Creek Ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Belle took his hand cautiously, her voice barely audible. Belle Kincaid, Miss Kincaid, I want you to understand something, he said quietly, so only she could hear. I bought your freedom today, not you. You're welcome to stay at my ranch until you decide what you want to do, but you don't belong to me or anyone else. Belle stared at him, unable to comprehend his words. Why would you do that? You don't even know me. Isaac's eyes softened slightly. No decent person should be sold like cattle. Come on, my wagon's this way. We should leave town before dark. As they walked through the dispersing crowd, Belle felt the stares and heard the whispers. Her reputation was already in tatters simply by being on that auction block, and now leaving town with a man she didn't know would seal her fate in the eyes of Denver society. Isaac's wagon was simple but sturdy, loaded with supplies. He helped her climb onto the wooden seat before taking the reins. I have a housekeeper at the ranch, he explained as they left town. Mrs. Winters, she's been with me since I started the place. She'll help you get settled. Belle nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Mr. Grant, I don't know how to thank you. No need for thanks, he replied, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. And it's Isaac. The 10 miles to Double Creek Ranch passed mostly in silence. Belle watched the landscape change from the clustered buildings of Denver to open plains that eventually gave way to rolling hills. When they crested a rise, Isaac pulled the wagon to a stop. There it is, he said, a hint of pride in his voice. Double Creek. Below them stretched a valley with 2 streams converging near a cluster of buildings, a large 2-story house, a barn, bunkhouses, and corrals. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures and horses grazed in a fenced meadow. You built all this? Belle asked, genuinely impressed. Started with a tent and 10 head of cattle, Isaac nodded. Took 8 years. As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, stout and gray-haired, with an apron tied around her waist. That's Mrs. Winters, Isaac said, raising a hand in greeting. The wagon rolled to a stop and Isaac jumped down, coming around to help Belle. Isaac Grant, who is this? Mrs. Winters asked, her hands on her hips but kindness in her eyes. Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Belle Kincaid. She'll be staying with us for a while. He briefly explained the situation in Denver, watching the older woman's expression soften. Well, you poor dear, Mrs. Winters said, putting an arm around Belle's shoulders. Come inside. You look like you could use a hot meal and some rest. Belle glanced back at Isaac, who nodded encouragingly. Go on, Mrs. Winters will take good care of you. I need to see to the horses and explain to the men why we don't have any new breeding stock. Inside, the ranch house was simple but comfortable, polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and windows that let in the late afternoon light. Mrs. Winters led Belle to a small bedroom on the 2nd floor. This will be your room, the housekeeper said, opening the door to reveal a space with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the corrals. It's not much, but it's clean. It's more than I expected, Belle replied honestly. After her father's death 3 months ago, she had been living in a corner of the laundry where she worked until her father's creditors had tracked her down. Mrs. Winters studied her face. You've had a hard time of it, haven't you, child? The simple kindness broke through Belle's carefully constructed wall. Tears filled her eyes, and before she could stop them, they were streaming down her cheeks. Mrs. Winters pulled her into a motherly embrace, patting her back. There, you're safe now. Isaac is a good man, the best I know. You're among friends here. Later that evening, after Belle had washed and changed into a dress Mrs. Winters had found for her, she joined Isaac and the housekeeper for dinner. The food was simple beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie, but it was the best meal Belle had eaten in months. Tomorrow I can show you around the ranch if you'd like, Isaac offered as they ate. Belle nodded. I'd appreciate that, and I want to work while I'm here. I can cook, clean, so whatever you need. Mrs. Winters handles most of that, Isaac replied, but I'm sure she wouldn't mind the help. Indeed not, the older woman agreed. And with spring roundup coming, we'll have a bunkhouse full of hungry cowboys to feed. After dinner, Isaac excused himself to check on a mare that was close to foaling, leaving Belle and Mrs. Winters to clean up. He's not what I expected, Belle admitted as she dried the dishes Mrs. Winters washed. And what did you expect, dear? Belle hesitated. I don't know, when a man pays that much money for a woman at auction. Mrs. Winters nodded in understanding. Isaac isn't like most men. His parents died when he was 16, father in a mining accident, mother from pneumonia the following winter. He raised his younger sister on his own until she married and moved to California 4 years ago. He knows what it means to struggle, to be vulnerable. The following morning, Belle woke early, the sun just beginning to lighten the sky. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, finding Mrs. Winters already busy in the kitchen. Good morning, dear, the housekeeper greeted her. Isaac is already out checking the cattle, but he'll be back for breakfast. Would you mind feeding the chickens? The coop is just behind the house. Belle nodded eagerly, taking the bucket of feed Mrs. Winters handed her. Outside, the morning air was crisp, the grass still wet with dew. She made her way to the chicken coop, where a dozen hens clucked and scratched. She had just finished feeding them and was collecting eggs when she heard hoofbeats. Turning, she saw Isaac riding toward the barn on a handsome bay gelding. He dismounted smoothly and handed the reins to a young ranch hand before noticing Belle. "Good morning," he called, walking toward her. "I see Mrs. Winters has put you to work already." Belle smiled, holding up the basket of eggs. "I asked to help." Over breakfast, Isaac explained more about the ranch, the breeding program he was developing, the challenges of the harsh Colorado winters, and his plans for expansion. "I was hoping to buy some new stock," he said, a slight frown creasing his brow. "But that will have to wait until fall now." Belle felt a pang of guilt. "Because you spent your money on me." Isaac's eyes met hers. "I don't regret it." After they ate, true to his word, Isaac showed her around the ranch. They walked through the barn where work horses and riding stock were kept, past the blacksmith shop where a burly man named Hank was shoeing a horse, and down to the creek that gave the ranch its name. "It's beautiful here," Belle said as they stood on the bank, watching the clear water flow over smooth stones. "It is," Isaac agreed. "When I first saw this land, I knew this was where I wanted to build something lasting." They continued walking, and Isaac pointed out the boundaries of his property and explained the seasonal rhythm of ranch life, calving in the spring, roundup in early summer, driving cattle to market in the fall, and the quiet struggle through the winter months. As the days passed, Belle found herself settling into life at Double Creek. She helped Mrs. Winters with cooking and cleaning, mended shirts for the ranch hands, and even learned to ride a gentle mare Isaac had selected for her. The nightmares that had plagued her since her father's death began to fade, replaced by peaceful sleep and hopeful dreams. She also found herself watching Isaac when he thought no one was looking, the way he spoke softly to nervous horses, how he treated his workers with respect, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. He was unlike any man she had known, and she felt something stirring inside her that both frightened and excited her. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Belle was sitting on the front porch watching the sunset when Isaac joined her. He sat on the step below her, his long legs stretched out before him. "Are you comfortable here, Belle?" he asked, breaking the companionable silence. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "Everyone has been kind. Have you thought about what you want to do?" Isaac kept his voice casual, but Belle detected a note of something else. "Do. Your future," he clarified. "You're free to leave whenever you want. I could take you to the train station in Denver if you wish to go elsewhere." The thought of leaving Double Creek, of leaving Isaac, created a hollow feeling in her chest. "I haven't really considered it," she admitted. "I suppose I should." Isaac nodded, his face unreadable in the fading light. "Just let me know when you decide." The next morning brought news that changed the peaceful routine of the ranch. One of the hands rode in with word that rustlers had been spotted in the area, stealing cattle from neighboring ranches. Isaac called a meeting of all the workers, instructing them to be vigilant and to ride in pairs when checking the far pastures. "If you see anything suspicious, don't confront them alone. Come back for help," he ordered. Belle watched from the kitchen window as the men dispersed, worry gnawing at her. Cattle rustling often turned violent, with ranchers and thieves alike ending up dead. For several days, tension hung over Double Creek like a storm cloud. The men returned tired and irritable each evening after long days of extra patrols. Isaac's face grew more strained, the lines around his eyes deepening. On the fourth night, Belle couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit ranch yard. Movement caught her eye, a lone figure walking toward the barn. Even in the dim light, she recognized Isaac's distinctive stride. Without fully considering what she was doing, Belle pulled a shawl around her shoulders and slipped downstairs and out into the cool night air. The barn door was ajar, a faint lantern light spilling out. She approached quietly, peering inside. Isaac sat on a bale of hay, his head in his hands. Beside him was a small wooden box, open to reveal what looked like letters and a few small items. He looked up sharply at the sound of her footsteps. "Belle, what are you doing out here?" "I couldn't sleep," she replied, suddenly aware of the impropriety of being alone with him in the barn at night. "I saw you from my window. Is everything all right?" he sighed, gesturing for her to join him. "Just worried about the rustlers. If we lose any significant number of cattle, it could ruin everything I've built." Belle sat beside him, noticing a photograph among the items in the box. "Is that your family?" Isaac picked up the faded photograph of a man, woman, and 2 children. "My parents, me, and my sister Margaret. Taken about a year before my father died." Belle studied the image, a somber-faced man with Isaac's strong jawline, a pretty woman with kind eyes, a teenage Isaac already tall and serious, and a smiling young girl. "You look like your father." "So everyone says," Isaac replied, a sad smile touching his lips. "He was a good man, taught me everything I know about hard work and integrity." He carefully placed the photograph back in the box. "Sometimes when I'm troubled, I come out here to remember where I came from, what I'm working for." "And what are you working for, Isaac?" Belle asked softly. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the lantern light. "A future, security, a place to build a life, and maybe," he hesitated, "a family someday." Something in the way he looked at her made Belle's heart quicken. She found herself leaning toward him, drawn by an invisible force she couldn't explain. The moment was shattered by shouts from outside. Isaac was on his feet instantly, blowing out the lantern and moving toward the door. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice low and urgent. But Belle followed him to the doorway. In the moonlight, she could see several riders approaching the ranch house, their faces obscured by bandanas. "Rustlers," Isaac muttered, turning back to grab his rifle from where it hung on the wall. "Belle, go to the house. Wake Mrs. Winters and tell her what's happening. Then both of you stay inside, away from the windows." Belle hesitated, terrified at the thought of leaving him. "Isaac, go," he insisted, his voice gentle but firm. "Please." She ran toward the house, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard Isaac firing a warning shot into the air, followed by his voice calling out to the ranch hands in the bunkhouse. By the time she reached the house, men were emerging from the bunkhouse, pulling on boots and grabbing weapons. Mrs. Winters was already awake, standing in the kitchen with a shotgun in her hands. "I heard the commotion," she explained, her face grim. "Get away from the windows, child." They huddled in the central hallway as shots rang out in the ranch yard. Belle prayed silently, fear for Isaac overwhelming all other thoughts. The gunfire continued for what seemed like hours but was probably only minutes before falling silent. The silence was worse than the shooting. Belle strained to hear voices, anything that would tell her what had happened. Finally, there were footsteps on the porch and Isaac's voice called out, "Mrs. Winters?" "Belle, it's all right now." Belle rushed to open the door. Isaac stood there, his shirt torn and a bloody scratch across his cheek, but very much alive. Without thinking, she threw herself into his arms. "You're hurt," she gasped, pulling back to examine his face. "It's nothing," he assured her, his arms still around her waist. "Just a graze." Mrs. Winters appeared beside them. "What happened, Isaac? Were they rustlers?" He nodded, reluctantly releasing Belle. "4 of them. They'd already cut some cattle from the north pasture. We drove them off, and Pete and Hank are out making sure the cattle are secure. No one was seriously hurt on our side." "And the rustlers?" Belle asked. "One took a bullet in the shoulder. They rode off, but the sheriff will be looking for wounded men." He touched the scratch on his face, wincing slightly. "I should check on the men." "You should let me clean that cut first," Belle insisted. "Mrs. Winters, do we have any of that salve left?" The housekeeper nodded, already moving to get the medical supplies. Belle led Isaac to the kitchen, where the lamplight would be better. As she gently cleaned the wound, her hands trembled slightly. "I was so worried," she admitted, not meeting his eyes. Isaac caught her hand, stilling it. "I'm fine, Belle." She looked up then, and the intensity in his eyes took her breath away. "I realized something tonight," she whispered, "when I heard the shots and thought you might be hurt or—" She couldn't say the word. "What did you realize?" he asked, his voice husky. "That I don't want to leave Double Creek, that I want—" She faltered, courage failing her. Isaac stood, towering over her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "What do you want, Belle, you?" she breathed, the word barely audible. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, a question being asked and answered. Then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more demanding. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you on that auction block," Isaac confessed, his forehead resting against hers. "Why didn't you?" "Because I needed you to know you were free, that you had choices." His thumbs stroked her cheeks. "I didn't want you to feel obligated to me because of what happened in Denver." Belle smiled, understanding dawning. "That's why you kept asking if I wanted to leave," he nodded. "I wanted you to stay because you wanted to, not because you felt you had to." "I'm staying," she said firmly. "If you'll have me." The days that followed were filled with a new kind of tension, the sweet anticipation of stolen kisses and meaningful glances. Isaac courted Belle properly, taking her for rides across the ranch in the evenings and sitting with her on the porch after dinner. Word of the rustlers' attack spread through the territory, and neighboring ranchers banded together to patrol their lands. The sheriff eventually caught the wounded man, who gave up his companions in exchange for leniency. 1 month after the attack, Isaac asked Belle to ride with him to his favorite spot on the ranch, a hilltop overlooking the valley with the 2 creeks winding through it like silver ribbons. "This is where I stood when I first decided to buy this land," he told her as they dismounted. "I could see everything I wanted to build right from here." Belle looked out at the view, now familiar and beloved. "It's perfect." Isaac took her hands in his expression serious. "Belle, I know it hasn't been long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you standing on that auction block, trying so hard to be brave." Tears filled Belle's eyes. "I love you too, Isaac." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Belle Kincaid, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Of building a life here with me at Double Creek?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Mrs. Winters beaming like a proud mother and the ranch hands cleaned up and uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. The local preacher performed the service, and neighbors from miles around came to celebrate. That night, as Belle lay in Isaac's arms in what was now their bedroom, she marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few short months. "What are you thinking?" Isaac murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About the auction block," she replied honestly. "How terrified I was, how hopeless everything seemed. And then you were there, offering more than just money for my freedom." "Best investment I ever made," he said with a smile in his voice. "You spent every cent you had on a stranger," Belle pointed out, still amazed by his generosity. Isaac lifted himself onto one elbow, looking down at her with eyes full of love. "And in return, I got everything I ever wanted." 5 years later, Belle stood on the same hilltop where Isaac had proposed, watching her husband teaching their 3-year-old son to ride his first pony. Beside her, their infant daughter slept peacefully in her arms, unaware of the gentle spring breeze or the sound of her brother's delighted laughter. Double Creek Ranch had prospered beyond Isaac's original dreams. The breeding program he had eventually established had produced some of the finest cattle in Colorado territory, and the ranch had expanded to include additional grazing lands. A new wing had been added to the house, and Mrs. Winters, now moving more slowly but still ruling the kitchen with benevolent authority, had help from 2 young women from town. Belle's father's pocket watched the one possession she had managed to keep after his death hung from a chain around Isaac's neck, a symbol of how the past had led to their present happiness. The money he had spent to free her had been repaid 1,000 times over in love and family. As she watched, Isaac looked up, spotted her on the hilltop, and lifted a hand in greeting. Belle waved back, her heart full. From trembling bride on an auction block to beloved wife and mother, her journey had been unexpected but perfect. Isaac led the pony up the hill, their son, Isaiah, bouncing excitedly in the small saddle. "Mama, I'm riding," the boy called out, his face a miniature version of his father's with Belle's honey-colored hair. "I see that, sweetheart," Belle called back, smiling at his enthusiasm. Isaac reached them, lifting Isaiah from the saddle and setting him on the ground, where he immediately began to run in circles, pretending to be a wild Mustang. "He's a natural," Isaac said proudly, moving to stand beside Belle. He peered down at their daughter's sleeping face. "And how's little Rebecca?" "Perfect," Belle answered, leaning into his embrace as his arm circled her shoulders. "Just perfect." Together, they looked out over Double Creek Ranch, the home they had built, the life they shared, the love that had begun with an act of sacrifice and grown into something enduring and beautiful. No regrets. Isaac asked softly, a question he still posed occasionally, as if to reassure himself that she was truly happy. Belle turned her face up to his, the love in her eyes answering before her words did. "Not a single one."